Hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Indie Films Filming Gear and Techniques vlog series. I'm Shirish and today I'll be sharing my thoughts on the Panasonic Lumix G7 mirrorless camera. So this is the Panasonic G7 camera. It's already got a few things attached here which I'll talk to you about in a while. Now before we start, remember that apart from any facts I might share, whatever I say here is mostly my opinion or result of my experience. What will suit your needs for your specific application and your specific type of shooting conditions will depend on your requirements, and I strongly suggest that you take time to play with your gear yourself and test it out in a variety of situations. Now currently I have three main cameras in my gear arsenal: the Panasonic Lumix G7, the Blackmagic design micro cinema camera, and the Canon EOS 60D. Now all of these cameras are great in their own ways and I use all three of them for different types of shoots. However, the G7 is my camera of choice between these three cameras for most of my video work. Now the G7 is a micro four thirds mirrorless camera from Panasonic. So this is the Panasonic G7. And I've got it on this cage over here. So this is a cage from Small Rig that fits most types of medium-sized DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, and it's pretty handy. It allows me to have lots of things attached over here with this cheese plate on the top, and it's got a mount on the bottom that goes into my tripod mount. Now I've also connected a handle, a top handle, so therefore it's feeling quite heavy at the moment, but the Lumix G7 is actually pretty light. Now it's an entry-level mirrorless camera, so it's not built extremely rugged. So again, if you're planning to take it out on like adventure or something like that, then obviously this is not the camera for you. But having said that, for its size and its purpose, it's a beautiful camera. Now it can shoot 4K videos and it's probably the most budget-friendly 4K shooting camera out there. I've seen some videos on YouTube discussing the relevance of the G7 today in 2018, considering it released somewhere in 2015. And guess what? Mostly all these reviews have concluded that it is indeed still one of the best 4K shooting video cameras out there. Yes, there are better options like the Panasonic Lumix GH5. However, compared to this entry-level G7, the GH5 is Panasonic's flagship camera and therefore comes at a much heftier price. Another camera, the Panasonic G85, which is kind of the successor to the G7, is also a lot pricier than the G7. The Panasonic G7 is currently selling for around 600 to 700 Australian dollars, whereas the G85 is selling for around 1200 Australian dollars, which is about double the price. But you do get few benefits on the newer G85, like on-camera image stabilization and better weather sealing, which obviously this camera lacks. Somehow this camera has an anti-aliasing filter though, which is not there in the G85 or the GH5 for that matter. Now, coming back to the G7, let us talk about some pros and cons of the G7, in my opinion, according to my experiences. Let us start with the pros first. Now, for the pros, I think I'll mostly be just listing them out. So you are the one who gets to try it out. If you have this camera already, you must have already tried it out, or you can buy one before it goes out of stock everywhere, because already newer cameras come into the market. Firstly, as mentioned earlier, it provides 4K video at a very comparable price. Next, although this camera is quite light and small, it packs a powerhouse of features and functions. The menu is quite detailed and easy to use, in my opinion, using many dials and customizable buttons or using the touchscreen, which, by the way, is a fully articulating screen. So here is the fully articulating screen that can turn all around, and it's a touch screen as well, but you can turn the touch screen feature completely off, which I do in most cases. but everything can be controlled by all the dials that are there. And seeing that it's a small mirrorless camera and an entry-level camera, it's got plenty of dials. So it's got a dial over here to select between single shot, multiple shots, 4K, and timers, mostly for photography. Then it's got this big dial where you select the different modes for shooting, and then it's got this front dial just around the shutter button, and also a back dial over here. So these let me control various things like aperture and shutter speed settings. Now on the top here there are already a few buttons, including a separate record button for video if you want to use it. The shutter button can also record when you're in the movie mode, and halfway press gives you a focus when you're trying to autofocus. Now apart from these, there are a variety of buttons here in the back. So you'll see that there are buttons for arrows up, down, left, right, and a menu set in the middle. Then there are some common buttons like the play mode, but there are all these other buttons which already do something, but they are all customizable. So around 11 different buttons, I think, total, that are customizable to do whatever you want, which you can set from the menu, and you can do a variety of things. It's got an electronic viewfinder, which is also pretty good. So that's with all the physical stuff. One thing I don't like too much about this camera is that it's got the SD card on the bottom over here, the SD card compartment near the battery compartment, so I'll have to open this every time. I just try and make sure my rig is such that I can open this. It would be great if it would have been on the side, but unfortunately it's not. Then there is HDMI, AV digital out remote. Now HDMI is one thing that I definitely use from here, and there is a 3.5mm microphone jack which you can connect to, and you can set the levels manually, so that's also very good. Now the camera also provides options for various picture styles with parameters like sharpness and contrast values, etc., that are customizable. I usually use the neutral, or the natural, I think it's called on the Panasonic cameras, the natural picture style, which is quite flat and good, and it works for me. There is also a flatter one called Cine-like D, which is apparently supposed to mimic a Cine-like flat picture style, but I didn't quite like that because I got a bit of weird yellow tint and I didn't quite like the colors in that. But apart from that, also there is a custom highlight shadow curve that can be set, therefore allowing a maximum amount of tweaking on camera to capture more details in the highlight and shadow regions. Now I tried using that, and I tried a few shots without having the highlights and shadows used, with the curve just flat, and putting the highlights, cutting out the highlights and boosting up the shadows to get a flatter image. So you can go up till from 0 to +5 or -5, either ways. So when I go like highlights -5 and shadows +5, I do get the flattest image, but it starts to become a bit waxy. So you get to choose between what you want to use for shadows and highlights, which is a good thing. Finally, I mentioned to the easy to set up Wi-Fi capabilities that also allow remote monitoring and camera control using a smartphone app. That came in quite handy for me. Now let us talk about some cons. The first thing that bothered me was the inability to monitor using an external field monitor during recording. So I can connect an external field monitor using the HDMI connection, which I prefer to do for various different types of shoots. Unfortunately, while I get image on both the LCD here and the field monitor, which is good because Canon cameras don't do that, or the one I have doesn't do that, while you're on standby, that is good, but the moment you start recording, the external field monitor goes off. Now, especially during my vlogs, I'm in front of the camera myself. I like to monitor myself using a field monitor which is facing towards me, which I've kept it over there at the moment. But the problem is it goes off while I'm recording. Now the actual LCD over here, although it's articulating, if I have my rod here from the brick, it blocks it. The mic cable, if I have one, that blocks it. But even then, it's very hard for me to see. Firstly, it's quite tiny from a bit far away, so that didn't help me. Fortunately, I found a solution to this. Well, not quite a solution, but something that can help me with this dilemma, which is using the smartphone app. Now, the smartphone app allows you full controls. So what I can do is I can monitor myself on the smartphone app, and fortunately it stays on while I'm recording, so I can have my smartphone with me over here. And I can also use it to do touch focus, which is very good, because another con now I'm going to talk about is the autofocus. The autofocus is not that great, especially the continuous autofocus, I should say. Well, for a single autofocus, it's decently fast enough. For continuous autofocus, it's pretty bad. Now, Canon cameras have been better at this, and especially with the newer dual pixel autofocus, the newer Canon cameras are really good. I've heard that it's not just the entry-level G7, but even the GH5 autofocus does suffer for continuous autofocus, which is a problem. Now, especially when I'm vlogging or in front of the camera myself and I do not have anyone else to help me with it and pull focus so that I'm in focus. Especially because I'm using a lens wide open, so you can see that the depth of field is quite shallow. What the smartphone app allowed me to do is I could just touch the region I wanted to focus on the smartphone app, like a touch focus, and it focuses. Sometimes it takes 2 attempts, but at least I can focus remotely from where I'm sitting, which is good. Now, the last con that I want to talk about, or it might be rather a bit of whinging from me here, is about native micro four thirds lenses. So the micro four thirds lenses, there are a wide variety of them, but I find that there are much better and much wider variety of lenses available for other mounts, especially the Canon EF mount, than compared to the M43 mount. Since I also own a Canon DSLR, it was much easier for me to be able to use my Canon lenses. For this, the trick is a speed booster. Now, there are a few speed booster options available. The Metabones is probably the most well known, but it is quite expensive. It'll cost you the same amount as this camera or even more. So I was not keen to get a Metabones for this, at least. For that reason, I bought a Viltrox EF M2 speed booster. So the speed booster is currently here attached to this camera. Now, I usually keep it attached because I usually use EF lenses. This speed booster is pretty good. It works. It comes for around 200 Australian dollars at the moment. And the optics are pretty decent. That's probably the main thing that you want to look for when you're adding a bit of glass in front of your camera and before your lens. Now, it works. It reduces the native crop factor of close to 2.05 or 2.07 when I'm shooting 4K videos on the G7 to a crop factor of about 1.57, which is comparable to the APS-C sensors. Now I can use my favorite lens, which is the Sigma 18-35 f1.8 with my G7, and that is what I usually do when I use this camera. So all in all, G7 is undeniably one of the best cameras ever made, considering its price obviously, and I would highly recommend it. I have watched experienced vloggers reviewing the G7, and while mostly giving it a good review, concluding that G7 could be a great B cam. I say, why B cam? It could be a A cam, especially if you are just starting out. So hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and if you have any questions or thoughts, please post on the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy filming, and see you all again soon.